Alright, so I'm going to do a quick lesson. Well, it's not going to be too quick, but on adding and subtracting integers. I'm going to teach this two different ways. Um, the first method is a method I actually prefer to teach. Great, Benji. Is the method I prefer to teach, and it works like this. I'm going to use red dots for negatives, and I have -2. And now I'm adding 3 negatives. 1, 2, 3. So if I'm at -2 and I add 3 more, I have 5 negatives. So example number 1 is -5. Well, the blue dots represent positive values. So here I have a +2, and now I'm adding 3 red. Now the deal is, if I have a +1 and a -1, it's going to cancel out. So swap to black, and you'll see that these two will go away because a +1 and a -1 is 0. A +1 and a -1 is still 0. So my final answer here is just a -1. And that makes sense because I'm at +2 and I'm adding 3 negatives, so I have to go down 1, 2, 3. And that gives me a -1. Well, this time I have a +3, and this is where it gets a little weird. It says I have to take away 2 reds, 2 negatives. Well, I can't take away 2 negatives because I don't have any negatives to take away from my group. Right now, all I have is a +3. So what's the opposite of taking away? It's addition. But what's the opposite of negative? It's positive. So instead of taking away 2 negatives, I can always add 2 more positives. And a friend of mine said, if you're at 3, negative means to go down, but the other negative swaps the direction. So 3, 4, 5. I don't particularly like that idea, but I do like my explanation a little bit better. And there you have it. So now I'm at here, and if I'm going fast, pause and go back. But right now, what do we start with? Remember, red's negative, so I'm going to start with 3 negatives. I have a -3, and I'm taking away 2 positives. Well, do you see any positives here? The answer is no. So once again, what's the opposite of taking away? It's adding. And what's the opposite of positive? It's negative.
It's very cool now.
So I'm going to, instead of taking away 2 positives, I'm going to add 2 negatives, which gives me a -5. I'm going to continue on. I have a -4 here. And now I can add 3 positives. Alright, well, I'm going to add 3 positives. And like I said before, those will go away, those will go away, and I'm left with, what am I left with? 1 negative, so I'm left with a -1. And finally, my last one, I have 2 negatives, and I have to take away 3 negatives. Well, I can't take away 3 negatives because I don't have 3 negatives to take away. So once again, what's the opposite of taking away? It's adding. And what's the opposite of -3? It's +3. So instead of taking away 3 negatives, I'm going to add 3 positives. And when that happens, take a look what happens. I'm left with a +1. Now, I know a lot of people don't particularly like that method, although I love it. So I'm going to give you one last method, and here it is. There's a rule for this. I don't particularly care for it, but here it is. Each number gets 1 sign. You do this by using the rules for multiplication, which is a negative times a negative is a positive, negative times a positive, negative, positive times a negative is negative, positive times a positive, positive. So basically, you'll see, if the signs are the same, ends up being positive. If the signs are different, it's negative. Alright. Once you do, and you know what, I'm going to give you an example down here. I'm going to give you an example like this. -7 minus a -3. So what I mean by each number gets 1 sign, this 7 already has a sign, alright? And that sign is a negative. But this 3 has a negative and a negative, so it becomes a positive. So it says, if the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Well, here, I have a -7 and a +3. So the signs are not the same. One's negative, one's positive. If the signs are different, you subtract. So 7 minus 3 is 4, and you keep the sign of the larger number, which is -4. And that makes sense because if I'm at -7 and I add 3, 1, 2, 3, I get to -4. I'll do another example. as I feel I should. And let me just erase this example here. And like I
I'm
said,
your
pardon?
baby.
If I have a negative 6 plus a negative 2, well, the 6 already has a sign, so it's negative 6. But the 2 has two signs. It has a positive and a negative, so that becomes a negative. And so now I go to step 2. If the signs are the same, which they are, they're both negative, you add them and keep the sign. And that makes sense because if I lose 6 items and I lose 2 more, 1, 2, I've lost 8 items. I'm going to give you one last example, and then we're going to be done with this. And like I said, what you should do is practice a couple using either method you prefer, and see what happens. Alright, so now this line doesn't seem to have anything. Well, if it's not negative, then it is positive, so I'm going to write this as a positive 4, and this as a negative 4. And now the signs are different, so I'm going to subtract. 4 minus 4 is 0, and it says keep the sign of the larger number. Well, neither one's larger than the other, but my answer doesn't matter because my answer is 0. If I'm at 4 and I go back 4, I get to 0. That's it, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it makes life a little bit easier. Oh, one last thing. You end up using the same rules when for adding and subtracting integers when you're adding and subtracting fractions, the numerators, once you have a common denominator. And that's it. Alright, enjoy.